Inside Schwerkolt Cottage, a place of hidden treasures. The cottage was built by August Schwerkolt in 1884 to provide a home for his second family. August died in January 1887, and the cottage was occupied by the family until his wife, Wilhelmina, moved the family to the USA in 1900. The cottage was then occupied by tenants until 1960. Over the years, the cottage fell into disrepair and was declared as unfit for human habitation by the Housing Commission, and a demolition order issued on the 7th of November 1960. Following strong community interest, the council gained a stay of demolition and purchased the cottage so it could be restored as a fine example of an early Victorian settler family home. With the restoration complete, the council appointed a furnishing committee who were tasked with the job of furnishing the cottage. The committee consisted of councillors Charles McCall and Keith Satchwell, Mr. George Cox, Mrs. Anne Creeber, Mrs. Jean Field, and Mr. Keith Patterson. On completion, 4 members of this committee remained as the initial committee of management. The cottage has a kitchen, living room, and 2 bedrooms and is surrounded by a veranda. There are small holes between the rooms to enable communication, as there are no internal doors. The general plan and appearance of the cottage is similar to the style of houses built in northern Germany and by German settlers in the Barossa Valley, South Australia. The floor of the kitchen living area was covered with linoleum, concealing an earlier surface of terracotta tiles. In order to discover the original tiles, the working committee spent many hours scraping away residue of the linoleum and were delighted to discover that most of the tiles were in good condition. The tiles in the viewing area were replaced in 2018 due to damage and are a near perfect match for the original tiles. Ads were placed in the Nunawading Gazette asking for donations of furniture and items needed to furnish the cottage in the style of 1900, as this was the last date the Schwerkolts lived in the cottage. Donations rolled in, and eventually furniture sufficient for each room had been acquired either by council purchase, donation, or loans. Many of the individual items were restored by George Cox, who was a trained French polisher, and were stored at his home until it was time to fit out the cottage. The main room of the cottage is the kitchen living room that contains a treasure trove of items depicting the way of life in the late 1800s. This room was the hub of the house, and the items on display provide insight into these activities. From listening to music or reading in the comfortable rocking chair, spinning, sewing, cooking, and baking, it all took place in this room. In the middle of the room, there is a large wooden table with both chairs and a bench for seating. At one end, there is a splendid example of a writing slope with a pair of glasses on top and a Bible. Preceding smartphones and tablets by centuries, writing boxes were among the first mobile writing inventions. Small and portable, these wooden boxes were equipped with a flat or sloped surface for writing and an interior space for storing writing materials. Invented by Thomas Edison, the gem is the base model of phonograph and therefore was affordable for many families. It was made in the USA and was powered by a spring motor or clockwork, which allowed it to play 2 wax cylinder recordings with 1 winding. Equipped with a reproducer, the gem allowed people to record voices or recitations on blanks to play back. A sample wax cylinder stands in front of the machine. This large hand and foot operated transverse shuttle sewing machine has an ornate foot treadle. The machine was manufactured in Germany for Hugo Wertheim circa 1880, and the cast iron stand was made by the Griffin Company. The sewing machine was used by Francesca Schwerkolt, who was August's daughter-in-law. Spinning, knitting, and sewing were essential skills for early settler women. The wooden spinning wheel was purchased by the furnishing committee for £89 for display in the cottage. This wheel has the spindle located above the wheel rather than off to the side, making it an upright wheel. This type of wheel is often more compact, thus easier to store. The large round sewing basket is made of woven cane, which sits on a cane stand. The pantry is the major storage area for the household and contains an array of items. There are 2 butter churns in the pantry. The large butter churn is an example of a hand-operated bentwood box butter churn used to make up to 14 pounds of butter. It was made in the late 1800s in Gisborne, Victoria by the famous manufacturer E. Cherry. Milk was separated to retrieve the cream, which was then beaten to make butter. On the top shelf there is a glass butter churn, which was popular in households in the late 19th and early 20th centuries for making small amounts of butter. Butter is made by turning a handle by means of a ratchet on the lid of the jar, which then rotates wooden slats inside the jar, similar to a box churn. With no electricity, candles were essential for light. This 6-hole candle mould was used for making pillar candles. Animal fat, called tallow, was the original wax used to make candles, but gave off a pungent odour. The use of beeswax gained popularity as it had a natural sweeter smell and was a slower burning wax, so the light from these candles would last much longer. Storage of food prior to refrigeration was problematic. This meat safe was used in the late 19th and early 20th century before iceboxes and fridges became available. It was a piece of furniture that was used to store meat and other perishable items, such as pies, bread, and milk, to protect them from insects and vermin. This example is a cream-painted wooden meat safe on 4 legs, with wire mesh on the front and sides. There are 2 shelves, and the top is surrounded by a ledge on 3 sides. The milk jug with its crochet cover is an example of what would have been found in every home. Early settler women were skilled craft workers and crocheted doilies and other napery for their household. The cover on this pretty blue jug has glass beads providing the weight to secure it and protect the contents from flies, insects, and dust. The fireplace contains a range of pots and kettles for cooking that were hung from hooks over an open fire. The fireplace also provided the heating for the room. This black cast iron kettle is more correctly known as a fountain or cistern, and it has a large hook for hanging on a chain over the fire. It has a brass tap on a long brass extension near the base. These containers supplied hot water for cooking, washing, and cups of tea. This example belonged to George Cox's grandmother, Mrs. Hogg, and it came from her farm at Toolenvale. The fireplace also contains a display of flat irons. These irons are also called sad irons or smoothing irons, and are shaped pieces of metal that are flat and polished on one side and have a handle attached to the other side. Sad is an Old English word for solid, and the term sad iron is often used to distinguish the largest and heaviest of flat irons. A piece of sheet iron was placed over the kitchen fire, and the irons placed on it could be heated whilst remaining clean of ash. Women used at least 2 irons, one heating while the other was used. Thick cloth or gloves protected their hands from the hot irons. The dresser was rescued from an old house in Canterbury Road, Forest Hill, that was being demolished in 1959. Displayed on the dresser are a range of platters and plates. One notable item is a wedge-shaped cheese stand with a high lid with air holes and a handle. It has a hand-painted flower design. The middle room of the cottage is the parents' bedroom. The main feature of the room is the beautiful cedar wooden double bed. It is covered by one of the treasures of our collection, a beautiful patchwork quilt consisting of small hexagons of printed and woven cottons with a red border. The quilt is of a random pattern and was made in 1870 by Miss Birch and her sister, Mrs. Bryan. They were both dressmakers and had access to the many scraps of fabric left over from the making of their clients' garments. The quilt has been hand-stitched in the English method over paper templates using fabrics of plain and printed cotton. It has been finished with an edging of red cotton twill embroidered with feather stitching. The wooden cradle is a replica made for the Society by Craig Mattingly in 1970. The design is modelled on a cradle in Latrobe's cottage in Melbourne's King's Domain. There is a mahogany dressing table in the left-hand corner of the room. On top of the dressing table, there is a large mirror surmounted by two ornately carved supports, which sits on two small drawers on top of the dressing table. On one of the small drawers, there is a white china container with a lid depicting the Duke of Wellington in uniform. It has a decorative edging that includes an inscription that reads, "Born May 1769, died September 14th, 1852, 83 years, Wellington." On the other drawer, there is a rectangular jewellery box with a lid covered in mother of pearl. Between the two drawers, you will find an ornate silver dressing table set. A 19th century bedroom also served as a bathroom. The dark timber washstand has turned legs and the main shelf has a circular hole for a basin. The bar above the main shelf provides a place to hang a towel. On the washstand there is a 6-piece personal wash set together with a man's shaving mug with shaving brushes and a cutthroat razor. The metal hip bath is painted cream on the inside and brown on the outside and is known as a sitz bath. Bathing was usually undertaken in the warmest room of the house near the fire, where water could be heated. The cedar chiffonier is from the estate of Benjamin Huntsman, who died in 1886. It was being used for storage in a workshop when it was rescued and restored by George Cox and Mr. K. Huntsman, who is a descendant of the original owner. The large wardrobe is made of wood and has two mirrored doors. It has a detachable headpiece and a large drawer at the bottom. Displayed in the wardrobe are several cotton nightdresses with intricate lacework and pin tucking, and a black day dress with a beautiful lace collar. The last room is the children's room, which is jam-packed with treasures. The black cast iron folding cot has higher sides at the top and was bought from Ireland in 1854 by George Cox's great-grandmother, Mrs. Hannah Granny Watts, and was slept in by each succeeding generation, including George. Hannah Watts was born in Ireland on December 23, 1831, and emigrated to Australia in 1854. For many years, she was Melton's only nurse and midwife, also establishing the first hospital in Melton. In the cot, there is a beautiful celluloid doll that was made in 1842 in Bretagne, France. She is dressed in Breton costume. The wicker toy pram next to the cot has an iron handle with an early 20th century teddy bear resting inside. The teddy is stuffed with straw and was made in Germany. Both of the children's beds are made of cast iron and are able to be folded up for travel or storage. The bed covers are white knitted cotton and date from the 1890s. Next to the bed is a rocking chair that is known as a platform or swing rocker. The rockers are fixed to a stationary base, so, unlike traditional rockers, it does not creep along the floor when used. What appears to be a beautiful child's tea set is actually a group of salesman samples. Travelling salesman samples were scaled-down versions of real products used to demonstrate features to potential customers. Unlike toy versions of household items aimed at children, many salesman samples were highly detailed. Displayed on an old-style hooked rug are two handmade trains, as well as examples of books and cards together with a set of German blocks. Because early hand-hooked rugs were generally made from recycled clothing, they were not held in high regard and not many have survived. The hooked rugs on display on the floors of both bedrooms were made and presented to the cottage by the Dandenong Rangers branch of the CWA and are certainly appropriate to the period. Photographs used in this presentation are from the collection of the Whitehorse Historical Society. Historical information regarding the contents of the cottage was sourced from the Society's document collections and from discussions with George Cox and Rosalie Schwerkolt Cottage.